Welcome to the Critic and the Pleb. I'm Ben, I'm the critic.
And I'm Caitlin, I'm the plebe. This is a podcast where we take turns choosing movies to offer our different perspectives and to hopefully entertain and or inform you all.
A brief warning. This podcast may contain adult content and will definitely contain spoilers. If you haven't seen the film in the episode title and don't want anything given away, please go see the film first and come back later to listen.
Oh, Lonesome Roads.
Look out for him. He's mean. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Andy Griffith, another sensational newcomer from Elia Kazan.
Home B.R. Free man in the morning. Free man in the morning. Free man in the morning.
Loved by millions, an idol of the people.
Bye, Lucy. So long, Luther. You write to me now. I'll be thinking of you, good people. Boy, I'm glad to shake that dump. I'm not just an entertainer. I'm an influence, a wielder of opinion, a force. A force.
Oh, if they ever heard the way that psycho really talks.
They're mine. I own them. They think like I do. But they're even more stupid than I am. So I gotta think for them.
Welcome to episode 4 of The Critic and the Plebe. Today, we Arkansas travelers are discussing my latest critic pick, director Elia Kazan's 1957 satirical drama, A Face in the Crowd, starring Andy Griffith, Patricia Neal, and Walter Matthau.
Reading the letterboxed plot, we have A Face in the Crowd charts the rise of a raucous hayseed named Lonesome Roads from itinerant Ozark guitar picker to local media rabble-rouser to TV superstar and political kingmaker. Marcia Jeffries is the innocent who discovers the great man in a back-country jail and is the first to fall under his spell. And Ben, why did you pick this one for us?
I can't recall exactly how I discovered it, but for now I'll credit it to Spike Lee, and he's the director of Do the Right Thing, Malcolm X, and most recently Black Klansman. And Spike Lee considers A Face in the Crowd to be one of about 85 films that are essential for anybody interested in film. There's this list that he put out. I think it's his official, unofficial NYU syllabus where he teaches, and A Face in the Crowd is on that list. And on top of that, I was just blown away with how prescient A Face in the Crowd is, especially for a movie from 1957. Because usually people look back to old sci-fi movies to see how accurate the predictions of future technology are. But A Face in the Crowd is the closest thing that I've encountered to a cinematic crystal ball. It was especially revealing to watch this movie 9 months into Donald Trump's first year in office, and it's impossible to discuss this movie without comparing Lonesome Roads to Trump on account of some really striking similarities that I'm sure we'll get into later in the conversation. But why I picked it for this particular episode, since watching, I believe it was August 2017 for the first time, I've become an avid fan. This is my third or fourth time seeing it. And I'm disappointed that it's not as widely seen as Kazan's 1950s work with Marlon Brando, and I'm disappointed that it's not as mentioned when we talk about great American satires like Network. And I want to do my small part in raising awareness about this movie. This was your first time watching it, and when it was done, you told me that the movie had definitely reached you on an emotional level.
Yes, that's putting it professionally. I would say it made me mad. Watching this movie made me feel mad, to put it very bluntly. And not because of the movie itself, but because of the message that the movie itself inspired. One of the first things we wanted to talk about was the character of Lonesome Roads. Larry is his actual name, but Lonesome Roads is kind of his stage name. What did you think of his character?
First off, it's nice to put this into the context of this being Andy Griffith's first ever screen performance. And he really hadn't had that much acting experience in general. He's not a trained actor, believe it or not. You wouldn't be able to tell by watching this movie, or at least I couldn't. He was a high school music teacher, then he became a theater actor, just doing some local circuits around North Carolina, and then he got into this kind of stand-up comedian phase for a little bit, and then he lands the lead role in this movie. Just thinking about how what I feel is a great performance. I think. What do you think? This is a pretty great performance as far as movie performances go.
Oh, absolutely. And when you said it was Andy Griffith, at first I was kind of confused because the only time I'd ever heard that before was in the comedic sense. So I was a little like, oh, okay, what on earth are we getting into? But I think his performance is very natural. It doesn't feel to me like he's reading any sort of script, which is exactly how Lonesome's character is when Lonesome Rhodes himself is on television or on the radio. He hates scripts and he doesn't like being scripted. It's really just kind of whatever comes into his brain, he spews out.
And he's a drinker as well in the movie. And one thing that I learned just researching a little bit and in some interviews with the director and an interview with Andy Griffith on the Criterion disc, apparently at one point Andy Griffith was doing some method acting and like drinking to like get into the character. There was one day where he pretty much just throughout the course of the shoot was just downing this bottle of Jack Daniels. And Kazan actually encouraged it for a little bit because Elia Kazan was a director who encouraged method acting and who encouraged getting into the character and getting into emotions, like genuinely getting into emotions, not just faking it. So for a little while he encouraged this drinking, and in an interview he actually said, later on, a few years later, he said, I had to get Andy Griffith drunk for A Face in the Crowd. He wasn't a trained actor. He didn't know what the hell to do. It worked all right. I did whatever was necessary to get a good performance, including so-called method acting. So I just thought that was pretty funny.
That is interesting. Was Andy Griffith, like, into it, or no?
Andy Griffith was, again, this is his first role, and he's coming from relative obscurity. Because he maybe had a couple of records to his name, like stand-up records, that were kind of what Lonesome Rhodes does, actually. Because Lonesome Rhodes has this combination of singing songs on his guitar and telling some old-timey tales just about back home and Riddle. And that's very similar to what Andy Griffith had going on for his own stand-up career. He wanted to be pushed by Kazan. He wanted to give Kazan whatever he could to get into the performance, at least according to the interview that he did for a retrospective documentary.
The performance, we both agree, was fantastic. I'm curious, did you like his character? How did you feel? Like, if you met Lonesome Rhodes in person, how would you feel?
That's hard to say because, and Andy Griffith puts it this way too, you know, this is a character who's able to put on a mask and fool people. And this is a character who's a very smarmy, manipulative kind of fellow. And later on, Griffith would say that the film took 3 months to shoot, but 4 months to shake off. So this character was something that he was very immersed in, and a character that he didn't necessarily like to be portraying. You know, he wanted to do it, but at the same time, just the content of that character is certainly not what I like to live my own life like. But at the same time, he's got this veneer that's very charismatic, very entertaining, funny. So honestly, it'd be hard to say for me because he does have that extremely charismatic quality that can be pretty hard to shake.
By the end of the movie, I honestly despised him. And I don't despise people easily. They really gotta earn it, and I would say that he earned it in part because he is so manipulative and he spends so much of his time being overly kind to people and doing all of these nice things and smiling and making people laugh. But ultimately, all of it is for him. And I think it's a huge defense mechanism for him, and I see it from the very beginning of the movie all the way to the end, and it just amplifies as he gets more famous through the movie. He is entertaining people, acting like he doesn't care, kind of like he has this like laissez-faire attitude towards life, and, oh, you know, things are just going to happen the way they happen. all of that seems like a huge defense mechanism for me, because you can just tell with his character that he desperately needs to be loved by anyone, and it just gets worse as the movie goes on. But and the drunkenness, honestly, at the very start of the movie when he gets arrested for drunken disorderly conduct, is probably another defense mechanism for hiding the fact that he feels lonesome. And he says, when Marcia's character gives him kind of the title of Lonesome Rhodes right away, he repeats it a couple times with like this little chuckle, like, oh, that's kind of funny. But I think that he's laughing like that because that's his biggest problem.
Sort of cuts to his core.
Yeah.
Caught off guard with how accurate the nickname was in a way.
Right. She'd only known him for less than a minute, and she already figured out his biggest weakness, and I think the thing that he is most saddened about. So the way that he just assumes that everyone wants to hear what he has to say when he's so famous, and that everyone cares about his opinion and he can do whatever he wants, that to me is a culmination of him believing being narcissistic and believing that he can rule the world, all to cover up that immense feeling of loneliness.
It's interesting that you bring up the term defense mechanism with him, because the very first moment that we meet him in that jail cell and the sheriff kicks him awake, just how he wakes up and how he reacts to that, you just see this feral look in his eyes. He is ready for a fight. Like he's ready to claw at anybody, for his own survival in that moment. Like I just feel like he's bringing like he's bringing more to that moment than just, oh, I got woken up suddenly. Like you can really see the feral nature in his eyes.
I would say he's a very selfish character.
So you did not like him. You appreciated the performance, but you did not like him.
Right.
At any point you didn't like him?
No. I think that's part of what he wants people to do. He's tricking people into liking him. He pretends to be sincere throughout most of the movie, but I feel like it's almost entirely a front. I don't think there was any time in the movie that I felt bad for him or that I liked him.
What's important to talk about is Marcia Jeffries' reactions, because she starts out as just this radio host who's coming in looking for her next interview in this jail. She has her reaction to Lonesome is really kind of the core conflict of this film, in a way. Because in a lot of ways, you can see Marcia as a symbol at large of just the media.
And allowing somebody to get that powerful, you're saying?
Yeah, because if we look at her just as a symbol of the media, she's allowing this person, this narcissistic person as you're describing him, to gain a platform because it's entertaining.
Well, and at first Marcia likes him. And I think she never stops loving him. I mean, throughout the film, but even when she first meets him, she is magnetically attracted to his charm.
The actress behind Marcia, Patricia Neal, apparently she was magnetically attracted to Roald Dahl because they were married for 30 years.
Oh,
That's
nice.
a fun fact I found in my research.
That is random, but I like it.
Mildly off topic, but there you go. Patricia Neal and Roald Dahl, together since 1953, divorced in 1983.
The biggest thing I think is on my mind about Marcia and the relationship that she has with Lonesome is that the near entirety of the relationship that they have together and the time that they have together is something that I would classify as an abusive relationship. He's never physically harmed her, but anytime that somebody says, if you don't come here, I will kill myself, I'll jump off this balcony, and he does it twice in the movie, and who knows how many times he does it off screen that we don't even see. The number of times that anytime you do that, you are exerting power over that person and making them feel guilty for needing to stay healthy themselves, to have self-care. That's an incredibly awful thing to do to a person, and it happens very frequently to both men and women where their significant other says, if you leave me or if you do anything to hurt me, I'll kill myself. It's manipulative and it's awful, and I hate that Marcia has to go through that. And even beyond just that very strong example, he is manipulating her the whole time, like saying, gee, I wouldn't know what to do without you. He leads her on, and it makes it seem like they have this romantic relationship and that she's so important to him, and then he just continually is sleeping with other women. The way that he treats Marcia is horrendous, and I feel much more sorry for her as a character than I will ever feel for Lonesome Rhodes.
I see what you're saying, and it's interesting that you qualify it as an abusive relationship. Which, yeah, there are certainly elements of that, undoubtedly. It's definitely a cycle kind of thing going on, going back to him and away from him, back to him and away from him throughout the movie, which is another characteristic of an abusive relationship. And maybe this is just because I've read the short story that it's based on, which I'll post the text to that in the description if I remember. But the short story is told from Marcia's point of view, and it's a really great short story. I'd recommend anybody, even if you haven't seen the movie yet, but certainly if you have seen the movie, to read it. Like it's just as good as the movie. I feel like it's a symbiotic relationship because, in a way, they're totally feeding off each other. I mean, Marcia feeds off him right away to make her show a hit, and she's following him to the top, no matter how bad things get, no matter how ridiculous the things Lonesome Rhodes is saying. And even if they didn't have a personal relationship, a romantic-ish relationship, she is still following this guy to the top, no matter how ridiculous the things he's saying, no matter how narcissistic, no matter how fake he's getting. She's profiting, too, throughout.
I would argue that she is not doing that willingly. She says multiple times throughout the movie, like, well, I found him, so I've got to stay with him. I think she's doing it more out of a sense of guilt. She says that, well, when I stay with him, I try to take the bad and the good, and I try to basically make the good better. Like, I try to make him better as much as I can. She feels that sense of duty because she can tell what he is doing and what he is becoming. I think she feels guilty, and I think she feels trapped.
Does she try to make him better, though? Because if we even look back at the early scenes, like when he pulls that prank on the sheriff and makes all the dogs go into his yard, and everybody brings the dogs into his yard to prove that this sheriff who's running for mayor can't even be dog catcher, she's in the car laughing right along with him.
That's different, though, because that's early on in the film when he's still just part of their community. When he starts, I mean, his sphere of influence at that point in time is really the town, and he's just a fixture in the town, and he's doing quite well for himself, and most of the things that he is doing, he's doing for good. They're resulting in good things. Should the sheriff have been mayor? No, he was not a great person.
Well, think of why he was doing it. You say doing it for good, but really, he's just being a vindictive asshole.
Well, yeah.
Because
I'm
the
not
sheriff
saying,
is the one who's arrested him for drunken disorderly and all that.
No, it was not his. He wasn't doing it because he wanted to do something good. It just happened to be something that ended up being a good thing. So Marcia wasn't bothered by it at that point yet. As he started to get more and more powerful, she... Honestly, the best parts of Lonesome when he was at his most famous, and you can tell when she's gone for a day and his entire operation falls apart, all of the good things about him, all of the things that were working well, were because of her. She was behind the scenes the whole time, keeping everything organized, making sure that people were able to work together and collaborate. He couldn't do that. Nobody would want to work for him, but behind the scenes, she's doing the best that she can. And then he's just profiting from all of that. She's not living with him. She's living in a small apartment by herself. I wouldn't say that yes, she is profiting from him, but I don't think that she's happy about it. At no point when he is famous do I feel like she is happy where she is. I feel like she feels trapped.
I'm not sure. I feel like she feels trapped eventually once things start to hit the fan later on, but I think she's just fine for a whole lot of the movie going on. I'm not saying that she doesn't feel conflicted at all, but I would say that there's definitely a whole lot of, quid pro quo, give and take in that relationship, and they're pretty okay with how things are going for a while because they are reeling in the dough and climbing that ladder of success.
When he starts promoting Vitajax and selling the snake oil and doing all of these things on the air that are very self-promoting and starts getting politicians some more power, things like that, when he's meeting with senators, all of that, you just have to look at her to know that she is not happy with it.
Well, either way, you can tell it's a complex relationship, which
Very.
is one of the things that I really appreciate about the film, and that I think that you really appreciate about the film as well. So at the very least, we can agree on that.
One of the other things we wanted to talk about with this film, or one of the things that I really wanted to talk about, is just because it's set in the 50s, we get some interesting glimpses of kind of what that time period was like. And when I was doing the math in my head, I mean, 1957 is what, just over 60 years ago? So really not that long ago, still within the lifetime of many people living today. Our parents were born not long after that. And the way that women are treated and African Americans are treated was just very uncomfortable. And I want to speak specifically about how the women were used as set pieces, or the number of times that women were used as set pieces. That really, really bothered me. And obviously, I mean, it's a movie set in the 50s. That's kind of how the way things were. But it's really disconcerting to me that just over 60 years ago, that's what our parents were seeing women doing. And the way that Lonesome kind of is a womanizer frequently is extremely upsetting to me. Obviously, that makes me just be upset with his character. But I was even more upset about the fact that there were some women that were just in these rooms literally to move a poster board and point to things and look pretty.
I would think that they're probably secretaries, but either way, I see your point.
Yeah.
I see your point. The point is definitely there. I would say that, yeah, there's that representation, but one scene that stood out to me more than it had in the previous viewings was the baton twirling competition scene.
Oh my goodness.
And
Cue eye roll.
while I was watching that scene this time around, and one thing that I will say is that the middle of this movie can get a little saggy at some points. It's definitely not as tight as it could be. And during the baton twirling scene, I was thinking, this scene is going on for so long, why is it going on so long? And at that point, the male gaze factor almost felt more like a feature than a bug, in a way, because so much of this movie is commenting on and making us look at what Americans see as entertainment. And that is a scene that, again, is laying out this kind of hodunk local form of entertainment with all these high school girls baton twirling at the football field. So I thought that the shots that were fetishizing that were kind of more trying to offer some commentary on, is this really what we're watching? Is this really what we're finding entertaining as a country? On top of all the Lonesome shows, on top of the Viajex commercials, I think that was just another ingredient in this cavalcade of American entertainment.
I like viewing it in that way. The baton twirling scene was just, I don't even know how long it went on. What, like 10, 15 minutes of high school girls?
A little under 10, probably,
a little under 10.
realistically.
Well, maybe it felt a little longer. But high school girls in skimpy outfits doing bends and throwing batons.
And very suggestive bends.
Very suggestive.
I was surprised. I mean, one of the high school girls becomes the next Miss Lonesome Road, so she's trying to seduce Lonesome, basically, and get his
Yeah.
attention. But I was surprised, just because I talked about the production code earlier, that some of those shots got in, and just how that scene was edited at some points with the legs and the skirts and everything. You know, pretty racy for 1957.
It was just very uncomfortable to watch. It was almost like a beauty pageant on steroids, and unfortunately a lot of beauty pageants that exist today still have that kind of level of fetishization of young women. Not to say that they aren't beautiful, because they absolutely are stunning, but do we really need to look at them as just their bodies and the way that they can move them around?
The answer is no.
That was a rhetorical question, but thank you, Ben.
Yeah, speaking of looking at women as just bodies, your
yes.
next point is concerning
The demagogue in denim, which one of the characters in the movie coins him one of the characters who has never really been a fan and who has really always kind of seen Lonesome Rhodes for who he is.
That's the character played by Grumpy Old Men's Walter Matthau, who's basically a symbol for the intellectual elite.
He's really the only character that we get in the movie that sees through Lonesome all the way. And he coins him as the demagogue in denim. And that's really what he is. It's a great way to describe him because he, especially when he's at the height of his power, spends so much of his time tricking people into doing things for him or doing things that his advertisers want him to do. He uses his power to sway the masses, even though he has very little respect for the masses.
It's impossible not to compare Lonesome Rhodes to Donald Trump as a campaigner, as a president. There are so many parallels that it's crazy. It makes me think of, those BuzzFeed quizzes of who said it. There could easily be a BuzzFeed quiz of who said it, Lonesome or Trump. And you could have Trump quotes alongside Lonesome Rhodes quotes. And I just picked out a few as I was taking notes on the movie. At one point, Lonesome Rhodes is saying that, screw shooting ducks, I should start shooting people. And
Right.
Trump has said something along the lines of, I could shoot somebody in the middle of 8th Avenue and I'd still have my supporters. And there was another key quote that Lonesome said, "You know me better than to believe everything I say." And he's saying that to his, business manager or to Marcia or somebody like that. And that's
He said it to
essentially what the
Marcia.
White House speakers, the White House press secretaries have had to say every time that Trump has tweeted something or reversed it on a position or flopped over his words. That's more or less what they say. Like, oh, he said that, but he did not mean to say that. Exactly. Or you can't believe that part. It's really just this part. In the short story, Marcia's saying, Lonesome took his first fling into international politics. Until now, he had contented himself with just telling us how to solve our domestic problems. But suddenly, I think it was from getting indigestion after eating some tainted shrimps in a Chinese restaurant, he went global. And then he starts attacking China in the book, which, again, sounds a whole lot like a certain president.
They are eerily similar. I think there are so many times when Lonesome Rhodes, there are so many times in the movie when he says something along the lines of, "The people love me, they're too stupid to know any better," or something along those lines. Trump has been quoted about saying very similar things, even about his supporters, but there are people that continue to appreciate that charisma, and that's kind of what Lonesome has too. Those people appreciate the charisma, they appreciate his honesty, they appreciate everything that he is saying, and that he isn't mincing his words. They appreciate that he's off script. He's a natural guy.
He doesn't use a teleprompter.
He doesn't use a teleprompter at all. He makes fun of the media. He makes fun of the big cities, and he has this veneer of being so humble and down to earth when really everything that he is doing is self-serving, narcissistic. He genuinely believes that everyone wants to hear what he has to say, and that everything he has to say is the smartest thing that's ever been uttered. Lonesome is that way, and Donald Trump is that way.
Not to mention other politicians and other snake oil salesmen. Like when you were talking about Vitajex earlier and compared to snake oil, I was thinking Alex Jones and his InfoWars shop with all those bogus products.
For sure. Many of which are vitamins.
Exactly, yeah. He's essentially just selling Vitajex. It's interesting that, again, I had watched this about 8 months into Trump's presidency for the first time in 2017, and it just felt like here is Trump in this movie being predicted in 1957. This perfect combination of somebody who gets big on TV and then starts to wield this massive political power, which is exactly what happens with Trump. He goes from the apprentice to the president of the United States. That's something that the director Elia Kazan actually enjoyed about the movie. He said that he did have some problems with Lonesome Rhodes in general. He's quoted in an interview later on as saying, "I like very much the first part of A Face in the Crowd, but the second much less. We had not created a character as deep as we should have." And he said that Lonesome Rhodes becomes too much of a capital V villain, and that he's not complex enough or devious enough, and therefore not formidable enough. But he also goes on to say that he's proud of the film because it responds to reality. He said it was the first film that shows the power of the means of communication. The film shows the moving nature of success and of the one who sustains that success. And what it describes, the fact that a personality of little scope, but pleasant and stirring, takes the place of real intelligence. That fact represents the dangers of democracy. One runs the risk of seeing a personality take the lead in a country, not because of his appropriate qualities and capacities, but because of his vividness. In spite of its imperfections, the film says a great many truths about America in a way that is often amusing and striking. And that's Kazan just reflecting on his own film, and that was a few decades after it came out, I believe.
So if we look at the end of the movie and ultimately the culmination of Lonesome Rhodes' journey, there comes a point when Marcia essentially sabotages Lonesome on purpose. He is muttering on camera and is at that time silent to the audience about how dumb his audience is, and he's like saying "good night, idiots" and things like that, and just muttering, laughing with all the other people on stage. So Marcia turns his audio back on, which means that everything he's saying is being broadcasted to the world, and people hear that and are understandably upset. They start calling into the studio and saying they're never going to watch Lonesome again.
With that ending, we see that kind of repeated later in Anchorman 2004. It's similar to Anchorman, just somebody being humiliated on air in front of his audience. But apparently, A Face in the Crowd, the writer was inspired by a kid show host at the time in the 1950s. And this kid show host was in a similar situation, and his mic was still on, and they were shooting the episode live. And he said something along the lines of on his mic, "That ought to hold little bastards for a while." And that brought down this kid show host. So they pretty much stole that and applied that to Lonesome's downfall in the movie.
When Marcia eventually does go to tell Lonesome, "Hey, it was me," Walter Matthau has this great speech where he tells Lonesome, "Yeah, you might win some of them back, but it's never going to be the same." And he's basically telling him, you're just going to have to sit here and stew in your failure and your loneliness. That's very satisfying to see. It's very nice to see that. And the movie ends with Lonesome screaming Marcia's name out his apartment window, telling her, like, "Don't leave me, come back." And I've never heard a more annoying voice in my life. That made me cringe, the way he was, like, screaming it out at the streets.
It's pure desperation.
Pure desperation.
You said that it did end abruptly, and I guess I've never felt that way about it personally. I'm not sure why. I just feel like it's a refreshing kind of hard end to this vicious cycle that she's been in throughout. So I feel like it's satisfying, especially for the Marcia character, to just, again, get out of that cycle. But you're not the only one who had problems with the ending. At the time when it came out, the New York Times critic Bosley Crowther said that the ending was inane. So he wasn't a big fan of how it ended either.
I don't necessarily think that it's a bad ending. I'm the kind of person that likes a resolution and a happy ending. I know I'm not always going to get that, obviously, but especially in this, I wanted to know that things were going to be okay. And it
Okay, for who?
For everyone that he misled and hurt. And it just ends with him screaming, so we just end with that voice shouting at us from the apartment balcony.
I mean, it definitely doesn't end okay. It's not even ambiguous. It's a pretty cynical ending, especially for a movie from 1957. To have that much insight into the mass media and into politics and into entertainment and into how those three major things were interweaving. Because there's this end montage from when he's getting away from the studio and down to the bottom floor of the studio building. And in the midst of that elevator, all of his sponsors are leaving him. The political kingmaker guy who brings him in to groom politicians is getting him fired from the studio, and his own business manager has found a replacement for him. He says, "Oh, don't worry, I've got a Lonesome Rhodes type right here." And right next to him is this other sort of southern hodunk kind of guy that clearly is just going to take the place of Lonesome Rhodes the next day. He'll spurt out the same common folk kind of rhetoric as Lonesome did, and he'll still be able to screw over the same people that Lonesome was screwing over. Kind of the cycle just continues, really, by the end. Not for Marcia, she's out of it with Lonesome, but as far as the media cycle and that manipulation, the machine's in place. Lonesome was just the shiny cog in there.
We've got to face it. Politics have entered a new stage, a television stage. Instead of long-winded public debates, the people want capsule slogans. Time for a change, the mess in Washington, more bang for a buck, punchlines and glamour. Yes, Mr. Purvis, even glamour.
General Hainsworth, my papers have supported Worthington Fuller from the first day he ran for public office. He's not a grandstander, a backslapper, or a baby kisser.
That's exactly what he's got to become. The majority in this country don't see eye to eye with him. We've got to find 35 million buyers for the product we call Worthington Fuller.
I think you underestimate the respect which people are never...
Respect? Did you ever hear of anyone buying any product, beer, hair rinse, tissue, because they respect it? You gotta be loved, man. Loved.
Well, I may be a bit old-fashioned, but it seems to me there is still a distinction between politics and, well, the field you're in.
Bull.
I beg your pardon, sir.
Sorry if I tread on your corns, but I said bull. Politics is people.
Caitlin, what would you grade this movie and why?
When a movie makes me mad or makes me upset, I know that that means it's probably a good movie. Like, it did its job. It made me feel things, it made me think things, and it was moving in that way. Even if I'm not happy about it, I do know that it was a good film. So naturally my inclination is to give it a higher grade. The one reason I'm going to bump my grade back ever so slightly is because I feel like there's one scene in particular that makes me want to reduce the grade that I give it, and that's a scene where Lonesome comes to Marcia in the middle of the night, and I think this is right after his Arkansas wife is sleeping with his manager, and Lonesome comes to her all sad and upset and is like, "Oh, you've always been there for me, Marcia. You're great, Marcia. What would I do without you, Marcia?" And he basically says that you're the reason I'm here. He's kissing Marcia's arm and like saying this to her as a compliment, but Marcia looks extremely distraught by that and like, well, crap, I think it is my fault that he's here and that he is this powerful, and I think the movie wants us to feel that way too. Just the way that it like pans in slowly on Marcia's face, it's like, this was your fault. You made this happen. And I really don't like that, because that completely denies all of the choices that he has made as a person. It's like the movie's telling us, like, you should feel bad and you should feel guilty for Lonesome Rhodes getting this way because you were essentially complicit. Yes, she should feel bad in that sense. Like, I mean, yeah, if you were helping him along in that way, sure, you can feel guilty about that, but don't let that overshadow all of the crappy decisions that Lonesome Rhodes has made himself. He was fully capable of making all of those bad decisions and getting to where he was on his own. So, I mean, ultimately the fact that the movie almost makes me...
Are you saying the movie's endorsing his behavior?
No, not at all. No, definitely not. I'm saying that the movie wants us to feel guilty for supporting somebody like Lonesome Rhodes. And the fact that they put that on Marcia's shoulders, when we've talked about the abusive relationship that I feel like they have had, that bothers me a little bit. That doesn't push my grade back much. Like, I'm still going to give this movie an A-. I still think it's a really good movie, but just that fact bothers me. And you're looking at me like...
Well,
that's a silly opinion.
Well, I don't think it's silly. I just think that, well, on the character level, like, I can see it on a character level. Like, if you're thinking of them purely as characters, as people, yeah, that's a really shitty thing for Lonesome to be doing or trying to do to her. On that character level. But I guess I'm looking at it on this wider level of, well, I still see that symbiotic relationship between the media and this madman. And on that level, it's like, well, yeah, the media should feel guilty about giving a platform to this person.
Yeah, and I guess that comes down to how you interpret it then. Are you interpreting it as this is a story with these characters, and that's how I'm kind of going at it, and that's how I like to view movies, is like these characters are real people. They aren't symbols for bigger things.
Well, I don't do that with every story, but I think that it's nice that the movie has that ability to have both.
True.
I don't think that doesn't distract at all for me. I think that improves it, the fact that it has those layers.
If I look at it on a character level, on a personal level, though, the fact that movie wants Marcia to feel guilty bothers me. Again, still a great movie. I still give it an A-. I think the fact that it made me so upset about so many things is good. I think it was well made and well acted, especially for 1957. Beyond the really poor mountain scene.
There is a quick little insert of a mountain that is being named after Lonesome Rose, and it is definitely not being filmed live.
They look at this, they just film him getting this award, and then him looking at the mountain, and then they just flash to a very still picture of a mountain, as though they're supposed to be there looking at it. That was silly.
It's like a still from stock footage.
It was bad. Otherwise, everything else was great. I just don't like on that character level, but maybe that's just me.
Fair enough. But I was happy to see that you were angry about it and that you were emotional.
You do like when I'm angry for some reason.
And it's funny because you were equally angry with Do the Right Thing at the end. And again, director Spike Lee, this is one of his favorite movies. The guy who did Do the Right Thing. So I found that to be a funny connection. And this is going to mark the first time so far that we have agreed on a grade. Because I, too, would give A Face in the Crowd an A- for different reasons. I think that narratively and just as a screenplay, and I mentioned this before, it does get a little amorphous in the middle, it sags a bit, and this happens with a lot of satires that I really like in film, and a lot of satirical books. That's really the only reason that I have anything knocked down on the movie, is that it's not quite as tight as it possibly could be. But you cannot deny the greatness of that Andy Griffith performance. Patricia Neal is equally wonderful. Less showy, but equally wonderful. And again, just the insights that it has into the United States, into the media, into politics, into entertainment, at a time where entertainment and politics and the media were just starting to really conglomerate. It just is amazing how prescient it is to me. Sadly, though, we talked about the ending at length. I can't see that ending with Lonesome being taken down in front of everybody with a broadcast. I can't see that happening now with a similar Lonesome type character. Or at least not with powerful Lonesome type characters. I feel like the cult of personality is so strong now that people remain dedicated to that personality and those types of personalities, regardless of what they do. So, unfortunately, the ending feels a little fantastical nowadays in 2019, but that does not stop this movie from being an absolute classic that definitely deserves more viewing.
All right, that is our episode for A Face in the Crowd. Thank you so much for listening. We're happy to have you with us. If you would like more content, please feel free to subscribe and hit the notification bell so that you'll get notifications the next time that we post. Our next episode will be one of my picks, and I'm pretty excited to do something very different from A Face in the Crowd, probably something that maybe will have a happy ending.
More than likely, knowing your tastes, which is fine. We'll discuss it either way, and hopefully we can entertain and or inform you all. Until next time, happy viewing.